Now, skipping down, he gives a long list again, starting in verse 14, with a lot of command verbs, a lot of imperatives, these actions. 14, all the way down to 25, things that you should do in a covenant connection or a marriage in their time. Now remember, we've talked about this back in 1 Corinthians, and it's really important here as well, that he's writing to those people at that time with their cultural constraints. So rather than reading this and saying, okay, now without any help from our current prophets and apostles, we're going to completely apply this to our own marriages. If you do that, you'll probably end up, if you're a man, sleeping in the doghouse. Watch what happens when you combine scriptures with words of living prophets and apostles who are guided by the Lord for our day to help us know what these means, or what these principles mean. In October 2022, Elder Ulises Soares gave that incredible talk in partnership with the Lord. Listen to these concepts. Let us consider two fundamental principles that strengthen the partnership between man and woman. The first principle is we are all alike unto God. So skipping down a little bit, he says, therefore, in this context, we are all considered equal before Him. And then he says, when spouses understand and incorporate this principle, they do not position themselves as president or vice president of their family. There is no superiority or inferiority in the marriage relationship, and neither walks ahead of or behind the other. They walk side by side. That feels a lot like unity and oneness to me.
Sounds like what God would say about covenants. When He would say, walk before me, it literally means to walk face to face. And if I'm standing behind you, I can't see your face. Or if I'm standing in front of you, I can't see your face. The only way to be face to face with somebody in a loving relationship is
side
by side.
So listen to this. They walk side by side as equals, the divine offspring of God. They become one in thought, desire, and purpose with our Heavenly Father in Jesus Christ, leading and guiding the family unit together. So again, I think you probably notice I really like this talk, and it's one of those that if you haven't read it recently, it's worth rereading. Listen to this part, he says, because some people have taken the proclamation on the family to the world, and again, they've tried to divide out the men from the women and make it a competition of my role's better than your role, or my role's not as good or as important as your role, which is not the point of the proclamation. It's to bring God's daughters and sons together in unity and oneness. We do have different capacities, different propensities, different roles, but they aren't intended to be divisive or even dividing lines. Listen to this. To nurture means to nourish, teach, and support family members, which is done by helping them to learn gospel truths and develop faith in Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ in an environment of love. Now, is that something only women are supposed to do? Or is that your role in your home as well as mine to be one with our spouse in making sure that this happens? What about presiding? Because in the world's definition, preside just it feels like president. It feels like you're over everything else. But
and some people think preside means I'm a dictator. The word dictator comes to dictation. I'm the one who speaks, and everyone just has to act. And as we said in a past episode, preside means to sit with, like to sit in council.
So now listen to Elder Suarez define that word for us in a home gospel context. This is beautiful. To preside means to help lead family members back to dwell in God's presence. This is done by serving and teaching with gentleness, meekness, and pure love. There's nothing that we would associate with a dictator or a supreme power of the world's definition of presiding contained in that. It's this helping bring people into this unity of oneness with God. So let's jump towards the end here of chapter 5. In verse 27, he says that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. That's what the Lord's doing with this unified group that's coming together, is getting rid of all the wrinkles, getting rid of all the blemishes, all the spots. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. And we happen to live in an environment, in a culture, in a society that is constantly feeding the appetites and desires and passions of the flesh to try to encourage men and women to break those covenants with their spouse and to look for other relationships as opposed to binding themselves to the Lord with the spouse in oneness with that complete covenantal loyalty. That it's like God. When I make a covenant with him, he will never break it. And I want to be more like him, which means when I make a covenant, I will never break it with him as well as with a spouse. Verse 30, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. And for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh.
There's the theme of one.
There's the one again. What a beautiful principle for young couples to seek this unity and oneness.